All right, guys, welcome to part 3. My name is Thomas. We've been covering some basic theory of JavaScript. We went over some basic data types, some arithmetic operators, etc. And now it's time to get a little bit busy and get real and code a little bit. So, what we're going to do now today in this section is to build a small web-based application, and we're going to go for a topic that is I don't know, is it okay or not. We're going to build a small calculator that will help us to assess our body mass index, BMI. It's a simple tool. It's often used to estimate the total amount of body fat in individuals. And so we're going to build a small JavaScript program to help us do that. Now, there are two ways to do this. And that's what makes this a little bit interesting, because there are two different algorithms that could be applied, one metric and the other one imperial. And in the metric method, we need to know it takes two values, the height measurement in meters or centimeters, well, in meters actually, and the weight in kilograms. Yes, okay. So we have to multiply our height with itself. We have to divide your weight in kilograms by the value calculated in step 1, and the resulting number is the BMI value you have, and you can compare this value to the weight status or classification table. I will get to that in a second. In metric or in imperial method, it also accepts height measurement and weight, but in inches and in pounds. And we have to, a lot of people know their height in feet and inches, but we have to recalculate that to actually be totally in inches. And then we have to apply a slightly different algorithm in order to get the BMI value, and then again compare that to the classification table. And the classification table is takes the BMI value, and if it's below 18.5, then you're underweight, and then if it's over 40, then you're classified as extreme obesity. And again, it's just an application. It doesn't really matter what it does. And again, the body mass index is interesting because it requires us to do a little bit of calculation, and therefore it's useful for this exercise. So let's see some code. Okay. So in order to get started, we want to create a little bit of a structure, a project structure. We're going to start with doing that. And we head over to our CLI, of course. We will create a new folder. So I'm gonna mcode dir, and I'm gonna call this a BMI calculator like this, and I'm gonna cd into this folder like this. Okay. I'm going to create a little bit of files. I'm going to create an index.html file, and I can do it here from the CLI. I could do this directly from my IDE, but I choose to do it here. So I do index.html like this, and I also want to create a subfolder structure. So I'm going to create I'm going to issue mkdir and create assets like this, and inside of that folder, I want to create a subfolder that will hold my JavaScript files and also my CSS files, because I will add a little bit of CSS classes to this. In my JavaScript folder, I want to create two files. One file that will be called BMI calculator, like this, it's a JS file, and the second file I want to add in this folder and in the JavaScript folder will be called BMI user interface, BMI UI.js. Okay, and the reason why I'm creating two separate files is because I want to separate my logic and the way I calculate and assess BMI from the user interface interactions. I hope this will come across more clearly as we move forward, but there is a reason for that in terms of readability and also reusability of the code. I will again place my entire algorithm and the logic, small logic, it's not much logic, in the BMI calculator JS, which in principle means that if I would like to reuse this later on, I can just extract that. So it's a little bit of a modular approach. More on that later. Now, let's see if we can open this up. So I'm going to open the entire folder in my IDE, and I'm going to pass in the -r flag so it actually opens in the IDE that I have currently opened in my on my screen. And what you can see here is that we have an index.html file. We have the assets. We can open things up here and navigate here like this. And now that I'm here, I would also encourage you and myself actually to create another file in the CSS subfolder. And this one I'm actually gonna create right here in the IDE. So I place my cursor over the CSS subfolder, and I right click and choose new file, and I'm going to call this styles.css. All right. Okay. So I'm not going to add anything into that file yet. I'm going to focus on the index.html at the moment. And as we did in the first very basic Hello World demo, the first thing we want to do is to add a basic HTML structure to our document. And I just type the 4 letters HTML, and I wait for my IDE to give me a few suggestions, and I choose with my mouse or with my arrow buttons on my keyboard the HTML:5 option and hit enter, and that scaffolds the entire HTML5 boilerplate code for me so that I don't have to worry about it myself. I'm going to change the document title to BMI calculator like this, and I will also link directly to my CSS file. So I start to type the word link, and I choose the link:CSS option that is right here, and I remove the content of the href like this. And look, this is also important so that we avoid making any mistakes. I'm going to type a dot and a /, and I'm going to choose the assets option that pops out, and there is a / added for me automatically. I choose the CSS option that pops out and the style CSS that is also presented to me. And in this way, by using the tools that are built into my IDE, I avoid making mistakes. Now I've linked to the style sheet automatically. Now, all good and dandy. It's an empty file so far, but that's definitely what I want to do. Now, inside of my body tag, I want to do a very similar thing. I want to type script, and you see there is a pop-up saying script : SRC. Stands for source. I choose that one, and it opens up a tag and also closes it for me. I type dot / assets and navigate to JS, and I include the BMI calculator.js file. Enter a new line. Do the same thing. Script source / assets JavaScript, and then BMI UI.js file. And in this way, I have the two files included in my HTML file, which is exactly what I need. So I have both the CSS and the JavaScript. We haven't added any content to them yet, but that will come short enough, right? So let's see if we can do a little bit of add a little bit of content, a little bit of user interface. Now, I'm going to style this as we move along, or once we are done with the basic functionality. But to start with, I want to add an H1 and say something like BMI calculator, and add 2 input fields into my my user interface. One input field that will allow the user to input their weight, and the other one to input their height into the system. And I will also add a button that will trigger the entire calculation and actually display the results. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say input, and I can do colon tx text. So I'm looking for a text-based input. So I say input colon text to start with, okay? And I am presented with this basic scaffold that adds a type of text, a name, and ID. Now, I will use the ID, so I will assign an ID of weight to this input field. I will not make use of the name, so I can select that and delete it safely. However, I choose to add a placeholder to this. A placeholder is basically a value that will be displayed inside of the input field, and in this way I feel that I don't have to add labels to my fields. I will show you what it looks like in just a second. As a placeholder, I want to say your weight 8 in kilograms, and I want to do the same thing here for the height. So I choose input text, I remove the name, I give this an ID of height, and I add a placeholder, your height in centimeters, like this. All right, so now we have 2 input fields, and I also want to add a button to this guy, and I do this, and I say calculate. Sorry about that. Calculate. Okay, let's see if we can pop this open and see what it looks like in our browser. So I navigate to my terminal, and I say open index.html. That is the safest or fastest way to open an HTML file, because your operating system is predefined or preset with opening up HTML files in your browser. Now, on certain computers, I think Windows-based computers or some OS X computers that have multiple browsers installed, this will open in the default browser, which might not be Chrome, but I let you guys deal with this accordingly. I would prefer if you open this in Chrome. So this is what this looks like at the moment. You have 2 input fields. I will make this a little bigger. You have 2 input fields, one saying your weight in kilograms, and the second one says your height in centimeters, and then you have a calculate button. So I weigh 99 kilos and I'm 186. I know I'm a little bit on the heavy side. And if I click the calculate button, nothing happens because we haven't added any functionality to do something with this particular action, click action. So let's see if we can make that happen. But at this stage, we at least have the basic user interface in place. Now let's see. You see, there are multiple ways to add or trigger some JavaScript actions when you add them to your HTML files. And in this case, I'm gonna show you a method that has fallen a little bit out of fashion recently, but has made a return into JavaScript world, and that is inline JavaScript. So what I can do, I can bind an event directly to the button that we want to utilize, the calculate button, and I can do that by saying inside of this HTML tag, I can add an action calling onClick. So onClick, we want to issue something, and what we want to issue is a command that, or invoke a function that we will create in a second, but we haven't created it yet, but we will name it calculate BMI. And since it's a function, we're gonna pass in two parentheses. Now, let's switch over to the calculator and open up our developer tool. So I right-click anywhere on the screen and I say inspect, and I will make this a little smaller, like this, and head over to my console tab, and I will zoom out a little bit here, something like this. Right. And I will type in 99, 186. I have them. I've done this before, so they are preset or pre-saved in my browser. What you're gonna have to do, you have to manually type this in. I just want to mention that so you don't think that there's a selector. Now, look what happens when I click on the calculate button. We get an error because the calculate BMI function is not defined. Okay. Well, we're gonna have to fix that. This is a function that will be deal with the interaction between the user that uses, or the person that uses this application, and our backend stuff. So I'm gonna, because I know this, I'm gonna place that logic into my BMI UI JavaScript file. So I want to define that functionality. So I'm going to use ES6 syntax. So I'm going to store my functionality into a constant. So I say this const calculate BMI, and that will be a function. So I do this, and I'm gonna at this stage not do anything, but rather just do a console log, and I will say you clicked me, or something like that. You clicked me, exclamation marks. All right. Okay. So I just want to point out that I have autosave enabled on my IDE. You guys might not, and if you don't, I would suggest that you enable autosave, and I think you do that by going to preferences, settings, and you just search for autosave, files autosave. Yes, so there is an after delay. So I have them set to after delay 1 second. So every second it actually saves my progress, which is a good way to do that. I would suggest that you do the same. If you don't have it, then you have to manually save each file before you actually reload it in your browser. So you have to go to file save or command S, etc. You will see a dot where I have this cross. You will see a dot that will indicate that it's not saved. I do have autosave installed. Now I'm going to navigate back to my browser. I'm going to reload my page. I'm going to, I can fill in those values again if I want, and I'm going to click the calculate button again and observe what happens in the console. It does output you clicked me. Now you have seen the console log in action. It's actually bound to that function, and that function is being invoked by us clicking on the button, and then it outputs the whatever text we want into the console. All right, so far so good, but that's not what we came here for. What we want to do, we want to grab this 99 as my weight number and 186 as my height, and I want to do something with it. Okay, so let's see if we can make that happen. All right, in here I can safely remove the console log. I don't need it for anything. I want to define two variables. I'm going to say let weight input and also second one that I will call height input, like this. And what sort of value? So I declared them. Remember what we talked about in declaring variables, but I can both declare and initialize them. And what do I want? What value do I want to store in them? Well, what I want is to get hold of this element, which is the input. Look what happens when I inspect that one. I want this input to be stored in this variable because I want to get the value of that once it has been filled in. So what I can do is to get hold of it by calling for the document and make use of a function that is bound to the document object that is called getElementById. And you remember we gave this input an ID, and the ID was weight. So I can now just say getElementById weight, right? And the same thing goes for the height input. So I just say document getElementById, and now I want the height, like this. Okay, and now I don't really know what to do with this. I just want to make sure that this actually works for me. So one good strategy for me would be now to set a breakpoint directly in my code. And last time around we were setting this breakpoint in the browser by just clicking on the line of code number, the number that represented the line of code. But there's another way, a better way actually, and that is to issue this command inside of my code that is called debugger, and that will halt the execution of my program. Let's see if that actually happens. We're going to have to reload, remember that, because we have written new code, and I'm going to input 99 kilos, I know, and then 186, and I'm going to click the calculate button, and you can see that the execution has been paused. But it has been paused after line 2 and 3 has been executed, which in principle means that I should have my my variables filled with some data. And if you take a look down below here, you can see that there is a section that is called scope. We can navigate there and see what sort of value we have in there, but there's a better way to do this. Now we are in the sources tab. We want to switch over to the console tab like this, and we want to type weight input and then hit enter, and we can see that the weight input variable holds the element or the input element inside of it, right? It has been contained into that variable. And also if I place my cursor over it, you can see on the web page that it's actually being selected and highlighted what I what I have stored. Now there is a myriad of methods attached to the weight input because it's an element of the document object model. But what I'm looking for is to get the numeric value of what the user has inputted into that field. And for that, I can just check that by choosing the value object, the value function, function of this weight input, and that returns a value 99 because that's what the user has inputted. But remember what we said in the last section, that you cannot use numeric values that are strings for many things, at least not for calculations. And we're gonna have to calculate that. So use this 99 for a calculation. So we probably want to parse this this value into an integer or a float. It depends a little bit. And so we can say wait input dot value like this, parse int wait input dot value, and we get 99. That's awesome. That's very good for us to know, because now we know how to use this. Now we want to actually do something with these two values now that we know how to get to them. So we are going to go back to our code, and we are going to define a third variable. We're going to call it results, and we're going to set the value of this variable to a result of another function that we still haven't built yet, but we will in a second, that we will name calculate a metric BMI, like this, calculate metric BMI. And we're going to allow this function to take two values, the weight and the height. Remember, the algorithm that we are looking for depends on those two values, and we know how to get to them. So we can say weight input dot value, and then comma, and then height input dot value, like this. Okay, so once we get something back from that function, and we won't, this will actually raise an error for us once we run it, but let's just pretend for a second that we already have this done. We want to display this onto our user interface, and in order to do that, I'm going to jump around a little bit, but in order to do that, we have to take a small look at the index.html. We could, in principle, create a new node and modify it and attach it to the body tag, as we did in the first Hello World example. But in this time around, I'm going to choose to create a new div with an ID of results, and like this, and leave it empty. And please do note what I just did. I just wrote div hash sign and results like this, and hit enter, and my ID automatically converts this into HTML. This is called I think it's called Zen mode or Zen programming. It's pretty powerful because it makes me much more effective. I can type HTML code much faster, and I love it a lot. However, I don't know if your IDE is enhanced with that. If it's not, you can try it, but if it's not, you're going to have to type this manually. Div with an ID of result. You're going to leave it empty. We're not going to add anything to that div for now, but we're going to return to our BMI UI, and we're going to say that we grab this div, we store it into a variable. So I'm going to say let display results element will be that document get element by ID, and you remember we gave it results as an ID, and then we're going to say display results element inner HTML would be, for instance, let's string interpolate, it will be an H1, and we can say your BMI value is, and then string interpolate, and we know how to do that. And then we're going to close the H1 tag like this. And what do we want to string interpolate? Well, we want to interpolate the results. results. Oh, sorry, results. Okay, so what do we do here? Well, we grab the weight input and the height input by querying the document for elements with ID, weight, and height, store that into variables. We invoke a method that is called calculate metric BMI, and we pass in the values there. We haven't transformed them into integers yet, so we have to be wary about that. We grab another div that is on our page that has the ID of results, and we modify the inner HTML to your BMI value is something. And now we are by far done yet, but this will render a few results, and we can work our way through that. So let's see what happens, just as a sanity check. Let's see what happens if I now reload this page and I click on calculate. Well, first of all, I need to fill in some values because we don't have an error handler for that. And we click on calculate and we get a reference error. Calculate metric BMI is not defined. Okay, so we need to define that. And let's say that we know that we are now at this point we have the height and the weight. This is actually going to perform the calculation for us. So I'm going to extract that from the user interface and go into the BMI calculator JS file. And I'm going to create a new constant, and I'm going to create a new variable or a new constant called calculate metric BMI, and it's going to be a function. So I need to add a function, and this function will accept two arguments, one called weight and another one called height, like this, right? And for now, I'm not going to use them for anything. The only thing I want to do now is to say return, and I'm just going to say 20 or something like that. So I'm going to return a numeric value just for the sake of getting through that particular error. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to reload my page again. I'm going to input whatever now. It doesn't really matter because the value returned to us will still be hard-coded. And now I hit calculate, and you can see that what the program actually returns to me is saying your BMI value is 20. It is not 20. I know that because I haven't actually made any calculation yet. But it doesn't really matter because I know that my user interface is actually working at this stage. That's good. I do have my debugger there still. I will remove it later and shift my focus from the user interface and the calculations made to update that to my logical file where I will actually make the calculation and perform that check and see what we can get. Now, we can now remove this return statement. We don't need it for anything. So we want now to make sure that our weight and height is actually numbers. Okay, so we can do it right here. Although I would suggest that we do it in the user interface JavaScript file because it feels like a responsibility of the user interface to pass in the right values into my logical file. So I'm actually going to do it here. So I'm going to say parse int, and I'm going to put this value inside of my method, and I'm going to parse int the second one as well, and I'm going to pass this in here like this. Okay, and so in order to move forward, I just want to format my code like this and make sure that I shift my focus back again. Now that I know that these are actually integers, I can shift my focus back to the BMI calculator. Okay, so at this stage, I can shift my focus back to the calculate metric BMI. I'm going to define a variable result, and this is the value that I will return later once we're done. But we need to set the result. So I'm declaring it on line 2, and I will initialize it in here by performing the actual calculation. So what I need to do is to multiply the height with itself, and then divide my weight with that value. I have to multiply the height with itself and divide the weight with that value. So we're going to say weight divided by height times itself. Okay, now there is a problem here because the algorithm states that the height needs to be in meters, and it is in centimeters at this point. So let's see what this gives us. Let's reload this guy. We're going to choose 186 again, and we get a value of 0.00228, which is not the right value because I'm doing this in using centimeters and not meters. And this is a fairly easy fix because it's simple for us to change our value from centimeters to meters. We just take the height like this, and we divide that height with 100. And we do the same thing here, like this. And now we have enough parentheses. And we're going to try this guy again, reload this page, choose 99, 186, and calculate this. And now I have a BMI value of 28.61 and so forth. Now, we don't need that many decimals, of course. So what we want to do here is to shorten this into a 2-decimal kind of number. So we could just try this out in our console. So if I have 28 point yada 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 yada, I can call a method on this float and say to fixed. Fixed. Can I do that like this? Yes, I can. And that will return 28.12 for me as a string, which is okay for me because when I display it, I can definitely display this as a string and return it as a string because I won't use it for any more calculations. But the only thing I want to do now is to go back to here to my return statement and just say either call it on here or on here if I just wrap this into parentheses again and call it like this. Because it will perform the calculation first and then call toFix2. Let's see if that works. Let's reload 299, 186, and now we have a BMI value of 28.62, which is nice. Okay, so that will settle that. We have now successfully calculated the BMI value. Now what we want to do as the next step is to get the actual message, whether I'm underweight, normal weight, obesity, or whatever, right? So let's focus on that for a second. Now we can create a get like a message and get that message based on the results that we receive from this calculate BMI or calculate metric BMI method. So we could head over to our BMI UI, and somewhere here after line 4 we could say something like let message equal, let's call it get BMI classification, and I want to pass in the value that I just got back. But remember that we got results back as a string because we used this to fixed with 2 decimals. So we need to again parse this into a float this time, not an integer, but rather a float. We're going to say parse float results like this. Okay, and this get BMI classification, or we can call it, yeah, let's stick with that, because I could potentially add get BMI classification message, but that tends to kind of break my own rules of not using too long variable names, yada yada. Let's stick to that. We're gonna place this function here in our BMI calculated JS file, and again it's gonna take one or we're going to take a value, we're going to call it value. We're going to pass in something that is called result in our other file, but here once it hits us here, we're going to store this in a variable called value. And here we're just going to, for the sake of it, we're just going to say return you know, looks good or something. No, we're going to say normal. We're just going to hard code this value for now. I'm not going to use this variable for anything. And here, in our display result element, we want to say, and you are deemed, and then string interpolate the message like this. Message. Okay. We're going to remove this debugger now. We don't need it for anything. All right. So we're just hard coding the message in normal in this get BMI classification, and which means that we should be getting your BMI value is 28 something, given we pass in my values, it's 28 something, and you are deemed normal, which is not true. Anyway, let's see if we can get this to happen. I'm going to reload this page again, make this a little smaller, and then just input the same values as we did before, and we get this, your BMI value is 28.62 and you are deemed normal. Okay, now which is of course not exactly the case here, because we haven't actually made any you know, any check for this. So let's make that happen. Okay, in our BMI calculator, in this get BMI classification, we're gonna remove this return, and we're gonna create an if statement, actually a series of if statements. This will go through a refactoring later for those of you who are totally for clean and readable code. But let's start with something. I just want to have a working solution in place first, and then make it better as we move forward. So anyway, we're going to say something like this. If we're going to use an if statement, we haven't covered that yet, so tag along on this one because it's really important. So if statements are basically statements that are can hold some code that will be run or executed if certain conditions are deemed to be true or false, and hence the connection to the booleans that we spoke about earlier. So if the value that we pass in as an attribute of this or an argument of this function, if this is smaller than 18.5, then, and I pass in a new block, then I will return underweight. Okay, and then we can say else. If it doesn't return true, then I can do something else, right? But I want to continue those checks. So in JavaScript, you can kind of have nested if statements, which is a little bit of a stretch, you know, in terms of how well, you know, your code is structured. But again, as I mentioned before, for now, we're going to settle for this. We're just going to continue to do this if, else if, and then another condition, and say value is less than 25. Then we're going to return something else, and we're going to say return, and in this case it's going to be normal weight. You're going to say normal weight because you're always normal, you know, everyone is normal. And then we can continue to do this. Now I can copy and paste a little bit, it's perfectly fine. So if the value is smaller than 30, remember the normative data table or the classification table. So if it's smaller than, you know, if it's between 25 and 30, you are overweight, and then if you are less than 35, then you have obesity, obesity class 1, and then if you are more than 40.1, I think it was 40.1, then you are obesity class 2, and else if you anything above that, then you just do else. You don't have to get a new block, and then you say return like this, and we say extreme obesity class 3, something like that. Okay, and that's what happens with our if statement. I don't have to return anything at the end because all conditions have been met. Value is always going to be something if we pass it in, unless if we don't, then error will be raised or fail silently. JavaScript is good at that as well, and there will always be something returned to us. Okay, so let's see if this works. I'm going to reload this guy. I'm going to say 99, and I'm going to say 186, and I'm going to calculate, and your BMI value is 28 to 62, and you are deemed overweight. Okay, well, not much I can do about that except for changing my diet, I guess, and start to exercise more clearly. Now, let's give this a little bit of look and feel. We are pretty much done with the calculation for now. We can say something like let's see, here on the BMI UI, perhaps instead of an H1 I can do an H2 like this, and reload this again, and we can change that like this and calculate, and it's a little smaller. All right, so now I can close my developer tools, and we have our metric calculation done, and there are certain avenues we can explore. I'm not going to do the imperial method in this video. It will be added in the extra sections of this course, but I will add a little bit of CSSing and give this a little bit of a look and feel, and also I will make sure that we can react to a key press on our keyboard when we have inputted our values, so we don't have to click on the calculate button but rather hit enter, and that will be the extra for this section. Anyway, let's head over to the style CSS, and first of all I would like to change the fonts from the basic Times New Roman, which I don't really appreciate that much, to like an Arial or Helvetica, whatever. So we're going to change the body tag to use font family, and the font family we want to do is the Arial Helvetica sans serif, like this, and we're going to reload, and now all of a sudden we have a different font being used on our small little application. So far so good. Now I'm gonna change the way our input field looks like. So I'm going to change override the default behavior of the input fields. So I'm going to say input, and I'm going to use hard brackets, and I'm going to say type equals text. So I'm going to overwrite the text input to have a little bit of margin, some padding, and some box sizing. So I'm just going to add this to this. I'm going to add some padding to this box, and again some margin, and so on. And let's see what it looks like when it's done. It's a little too big, perhaps. So perhaps I can do font size, and I'm going to say, for instance, 16px. See what that does for us. Yeah, it's a little bigger now. So what do I, yeah, looks a little better. Perhaps we should just change this to 10 and 10. Right, this looks a little better to me, actually. And I'm gonna change the what sort of, oh, this, yeah, I had 16px. Okay, let's work a little bit with the button. So I'm gonna say that the button will also be slightly different than the ones we had before. And oh, sorry, and I'm gonna give it a color first of all. So I'm gonna say background color, and I'm gonna use a brown color. These are web colors. You can either use the presets, or you can use the hex numbers or RGB numbers, whatever. I'm gonna make it really easy for myself and just use this brown color for now. And the font inside will be white, because it contrasts well against brown. And I'm gonna give this guy the same padding I gave to the input field. So let's see if that works. Right, and I'm gonna use the same font size, actually. So I can just copy this. Let's see what that does. Yeah, why not? It looks rather okay, in my opinion. So yeah, but how about we actually go ahead and use a slightly different setting for this guy, right? So let's see. I can show you a technique that I sometimes use. I'm gonna steal a little bit of CSS. So I'm gonna go to Bootstrap for documentation, and I'm gonna say to go to examples, not examples, documentation, and I'm gonna say components. Can we go to components? Right. Oh, here we have a simple success alert. So look, what I can do now, I can right click over this guy. No, right click here. I can inspect this guy. This is a technique that I use sometimes. And now that I can see this this element, I can right click over this again, and I can go over to copy, and I can choose to copy styles. Do you see that? Right. So I do that, and I will go over here, and I'm gonna say something like results will equal all of this thing that I just copied, and that's a lot. That's really a lot. Probably I don't need all of that, but let's see what it does for us. Let's go over here, and it actually adds the whole enchilada to start with. Let's see what it looks like. Your BMI value is 28 and your DMI overweight. Now, I would say that I don't need this to start with. So I will come over here, and well, I'm going to change my style CSS. I'm going to say I'm going to just say success, or no, notification. I'm going to create a new class called notification. So classes are marked with a dot inside of CSS, and so I should be good now because this is not assigned to anywhere right now. I'm all good. Okay, and now once we get the results, I will modify the display results element. Display, no, not let, sorry, sorry, here I am. Once I've added the h2, I will add the style class. Oh, how do we do that? Class list equals notifications. Is that how you do it? Style class. Let's see. I don't think that's how you do it. And if it is not, I'm gonna show you how you can solve problems using internet. So JavaScript add class to element, and it's not not jQuery. How to add a class name? So we're just gonna do class list add. Okay, now I understand. All right, so it's class list add. Okay, so we say remove the style and we say class list dot add and a parentheses like this. And was it called notifications, or didn't I call it notification? I called it notification, not notification. Right, there we go. Display result element class list add notification. Okay, so let's see if this works now. So we go 99, we go 186, we calculate, and now it's being added and displayed. So we get a nicer look and feel of the whole thing. So now you see me work my way through developing this BMI calculator. There was a few hiccups, of course, but there always is. You saw me do a little bit of styling on my own, and you also saw me steal some styling from a very popular CSS framework. I didn't see a reason to pull in this entire framework into my little project just to get that notification or alert thing. There's of course way too much CSS here. We could probably get rid of most of this and still have it work for us, and so on. But we definitely don't want the font family, or do we? I don't think so, and so on and so forth. But we can be quite satisfied with the thing that we just built. And in the extra section of this course, I will show you guys how to deploy this to an online virtual server. I will of course also show you how we can modify this and to use the Imperial method, unless you want to take this as a personal challenge or accept this as a personal challenge to try to do this yourself. And I will be open to, if you notify me about that, if you send me a link to your GitHub repository, and I can review that and perhaps give you some feedback on it. Anyway, thank you very much for this for your time and for tagging along. I see you in the next section, part 4 of this course, where we will be diving deeper into JavaScript theory and also do some well-needed refactorings of this code. Try to get away from the nested if statements, use slightly different conditionals, but also work a little bit with iterators and so on. Thank you very much for your attention, and I see you soon.